In the pulsating heart of New York City, where neon lights flicker and dreams are as abundant as the yellow cabs, I found myself on a typical Friday night, craving something more than the mundane. The air was thick with the scent of rain and the distant hum of traffic, a symphony that was as familiar as it was comforting. I had just left a lackluster date, feeling more disconnected than ever, when fate decided to intervene in the most unexpected way. As I walked down the bustling streets, the cool night air brushing against my skin, I noticed him. He was leaning against the wall of a luxurious hotel, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the lobby lights. His eyes, a piercing blue, met mine with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. He was tall, with a chiseled jawline and a confident aura that was impossible to ignore. There was something about him, a magnetic pull that drew me in, making it impossible to look away. He pushed off the wall and walked towards me, his stride confident and purposeful. As he approached, I could see the subtle details that made him even more alluring. The way his dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, the hint of a tattoo peeking out from under his sleeve, and the slight curve of his lips that hinted at a mischievous smile. He stopped just inches away from me, his presence overwhelming and intoxicating. "You look like you could use some company," he said, his voice a low rumble that sent a wave of heat through my body. I was taken aback by his directness, but there was something in his eyes that made me trust him, or perhaps it was the loneliness of the night that made me crave the connection he offered. "And what makes you think that?" I replied, trying to maintain a semblance of composure, though my heart was racing. He leaned in closer, his breath warm against my ear as he whispered, "Because I can see it in your eyes. You're searching for something, just like I am." His words resonated with a truth I couldn't deny. In that moment, I made a decision that would change the course of my night, and perhaps my life. He extended his hand, a gesture that felt both formal and intimate. "I'm Alexander, by the way," he said, his fingers brushing against mine as we shook hands. The touch was electric, sparking a desire that I hadn't felt in a long time. I introduced myself, my voice steadier than I felt. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, and it made me feel seen, truly seen. Alexander led me into the hotel, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back, a touch that was both gentle and possessive. The lobby was a whirlwind of opulence, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a grand staircase that swept up to the mezzanine. But all of that paled in comparison to the man beside me. We stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut behind us, cocooning us in a small, intimate space. As the elevator ascended, so did the tension between us. Alexander turned to face me, his eyes never leaving mine. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw, his touch sending shivers down my spine. I leaned into his touch, my breath hitching as his thumb brushed against my lower lip. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence broken only by the soft hum of the elevator and our synchronized breaths. When the elevator doors opened, we stepped out into a lavishly decorated hallway. Alexander led me to his room, the anticipation building with each step. As he slid the key card into the lock, he looked back at me, his eyes filled with a mix of lust and something deeper, something that made my heart race. The door clicked open, revealing a suite that was as elegant as it was inviting. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of the city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The bed was large and inviting, covered in plush pillows and crisp white sheets. Alexander turned to face me, his eyes filled with a hunger that matched my own. He reached out, his hands cupping my face as he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was both tender and passionate. It was a kiss that promised a night of unforgettable pleasure, a night that would leave us both breathless and craving more. The kiss deepened, Alexander's tongue exploring my mouth with a fervor that left me dizzy. His hands moved from my face, trailing down my neck, my shoulders, my arms, leaving a path of heated skin in their wake. I could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady, against my chest, matching the rhythm of my own racing pulse. The room around us seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of us, lost in a world of sensation and desire. His hands found their way to the hem of my shirt, pulling it up and over my head in one fluid motion. He discarded his own shirt just as quickly, revealing a torso that was as chiseled as I had imagined. I ran my hands over his chest, tracing the lines of his muscles, feeling the heat of his skin under my fingertips. He let out a soft groan, his eyes never leaving mine as he unbuckled my belt, his fingers deftly working the buttons of my jeans. I kicked off my shoes, stepping out of my jeans as Alexander led me to the bed. He pushed me down gently, his body covering mine as he kissed me again, his lips trailing down my neck, my chest, my stomach. I arched up into his touch, my body aching for more, aching for him. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a question, a request for permission. I nodded, my breath coming in short gasps, my heart pounding in my chest. Alexander's hands were skilled, his touch sending waves of pleasure coursing through my body. He explored every inch of me, his lips and tongue following the path of his hands, leaving me gasping and writhing beneath him. I could feel his desire, hard and insistent against my thigh, and I reached down, my hand wrapping around him, drawing out a groan from deep within his chest. He moved away only long enough to retrieve a condom from the nightstand, his eyes never leaving mine as he tore open the packet and rolled it on. He positioned himself between my legs, his body poised and ready. He leaned down, his lips brushing against mine as he whispered, "Are you sure about this?" I nodded, my voice steady and sure. "Yes, I'm sure." And with that, he pushed into me, our bodies joining in a dance that was as old as time itself. The sensation was intense, a mix of pleasure and pain that left me gasping. Alexander moved slowly at first, his body giving mine time to adjust. But as the pleasure built, so did his pace, his hips moving in a rhythm that matched the beating of our hearts. The room was filled with the sounds of our lovemaking, the soft moans and whispered words, a symphony that was ours alone. I could feel the pleasure building, my body tensing as I neared the edge. Alexander's body was slick with sweat, his muscles taut as he moved above me, his eyes locked onto mine. It was intense, it was passionate, and it was everything I had ever wanted. In that moment, I felt a connection, a bond that was more than just physical. It was as if our souls were intertwined, our bodies moving in sync, our hearts beating as one. I reached up, my hands cupping his face as I pulled him down into a kiss that was filled with all the emotions that were coursing through me. It was a kiss that said more than words ever could. As our bodies moved together, the pleasure built to a crescendo, our moans filling the room as we reached the peak of our passion. Alexander's body tensed, his muscles straining as he found his release, his body shuddering above mine. I followed soon after, my body convulsing as waves of pleasure washed over me, leaving me breathless and sated. Alexander collapsed beside me, his body spent, his breath coming in short gasps. He reached out, his hand finding mine, our fingers entwining as we lay there, our bodies still joined, our hearts still beating as one. It was a moment of pure bliss, a moment that I wanted to last forever. But as I would soon find out, forever is a promise that is rarely kept. As we lay there, our bodies entwined and our breaths slowly returning to normal, I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment wash over me. The city lights outside cast a soft glow into the room, creating a serene atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the intense passion we had just shared. Alexander's fingers traced lazy patterns on my back, his touch gentle and soothing. It felt like a perfect moment, one of those rare instances where everything seems to align just right. But then, something shifted. Alexander's touch became more insistent, his fingers digging into my skin with a sudden urgency. I looked up at him, confused by the change in his demeanor. His eyes, which had been filled with warmth and desire just moments ago, now held a cold, calculating look. A shiver ran down my spine, and it wasn't from pleasure this time. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on something in the distance, as if he were lost in thought. When he finally spoke, His voice was devoid of the warmth it had held earlier. "I need to tell you something," he said, his tone serious and almost clinical. I propped myself up on one elbow, looking at him with growing concern. "What is it?" I asked, my mind racing with possibilities. Alexander sat up, running a hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed more nervous than anything else. "I didn't just invite you here for a night of passion," he began, his voice steady but distant. "There's something else, something more important." I felt a knot form in my stomach, a sense of dread washing over me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and determination. "I work for a very powerful organization," he said, his voice low and measured. "And they've been watching you for a while now. They know about your past, your connections, everything. And they need your help." I stared at him, shock and disbelief coursing through me. "My help? With what?" I asked, my mind struggling to process what he was saying. Alexander's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing as he spoke. "There's a job that needs to be done. A job that only you can do," he said, his voice cold and businesslike. "And in return, they'll make sure you're well compensated. But if you refuse," he trailed off, his implication clear. I felt a chill run down my spine, the warmth of our earlier passion replaced by a cold, hard reality. "And if I refuse?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's eyes met mine, his expression unyielding. "Then they'll make sure you regret it," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "They have ways of making people comply, ways that you wouldn't want to experience." I felt a wave of panic wash over me, my mind racing with thoughts of escape, of survival. But before I could react, Alexander reached out, his hand gripping my arm with a strength that was both surprising and terrifying. "Don't even think about running," he said, his voice a low growl. "You're in this now, whether you like it or not. And there's no turning back." As I looked into his eyes, I saw the truth of his words reflected back at me. I was trapped, caught in a web of deceit and danger that I had never seen coming. And as the reality of my situation sank in, I couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal, a sense of loss for the connection I thought we had shared. But now, all that was left was fear, and the cold, hard truth of my new reality. The room, once a sanctuary of pleasure and connection, now felt like a prison, the walls closing in on me as Alexander's grip tightened around my arm. The city lights outside, which had seemed so romantic and inviting earlier, now cast eerie shadows that danced menacingly on the walls. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin, my heart pounding in my chest like a trapped animal. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. Alexander's lips curled into a cruel smirk, a stark contrast to the tender smiles he had given me just hours before. "I'm the bait," he said, his voice dripping with a cold amusement. "And you took it hook, line, and sinker. You should have been more careful. Shouldn't have let your guard down so easily." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as the full weight of his words sank in. I had been played, manipulated, and used. The passion, the connection, the intimacy. It had all been a lie, a carefully orchestrated trap designed to ensnare me. I felt a pang of betrayal, sharp and painful, cutting through me like a knife. "What do they want from me?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. Alexander released my arm, his eyes never leaving mine as he stood up and began to pace the room like a predator circling its prey. "They want you to infiltrate a rival organization," he said, his voice cold and businesslike. "They want information, secrets, anything that can give them an edge. And you, with your unique skills and connections, are the perfect candidate for the job." I shook my head, disbelief and desperation warring within me. "I can't do that," I protested, my voice rising in panic. "I don't know anything about espionage or infiltration. I'm just a regular guy." Alexander cut me off with a harsh laugh, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Regular guys don't have the past you do," he said, his voice laced with contempt. Regular guys don't have the connections, the secrets. You're not as innocent as you pretend to be, and they know it. I felt a cold dread settle in the pit of my stomach. He was right. My past was far from spotless. I had made mistakes, gotten involved with the wrong people, done things I wasn't proud of. But I had thought I had left all that behind, started fresh. Now, it seemed my past had caught up with me in the worst possible way. And if I refuse? I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. Alexander stopped pacing and turned to face me, his eyes cold and unyielding. Then they'll make sure you regret it, he repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. They'll go after everyone you care about, everyone you love. They'll make your life a living hell until you comply. I felt a wave of despair wash over me, the weight of my situation crushing down on me like a physical force. I was trapped, caught in a web of deceit and danger with no way out. The man I had thought was a sexy stranger, a kindred spirit, was nothing more than a pawn in a deadly game. A game that I was now forced to play. As I sat there, the reality of my situation sinking in, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss. The connection I had felt, the passion we had shared, it had all been a lie. And now, I was left with nothing but fear, betrayal, and the cold, hard truth of my new reality. In the end, all I could do was nod, a silent agreement to the terms of my imprisonment. Alexander's lips curved into a satisfied smirk, his eyes gleaming with a cold triumph. "Good," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "They'll be in touch." With that, he turned and left the room, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that sent a shiver down my spine. I was alone, trapped in a nightmare of my own making, with no way out and no one to turn to. As I sat there, the city lights casting their eerie shadows on the walls, I couldn't help but think of the irony of it all. I had come to the hotel seeking connection, seeking passion, seeking something more, and I had found it, but at a cost I could never have imagined. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to True Gay Stories for more thrilling and captivating tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat.